is Christoph Correll. I'm professor of psychiatry and molecular medicine at the Hofstra North Shore Long Island Jewish School of Medicine in New York. And I'm also medical director of the Recognition and Prevention Program at the Zucker Hillside Hospital in Queens, New York. Today I'll be talking about the content of what we discussed as members of the Child and Adolescent Psychiatry Neuropsychopharmacology Network meeting that took place at the ECNP meeting 2013 in Barcelona. We had members from different countries with expertise in pediatric psychopharmacology, in animal models, as well as in regulatory issues around pediatric medications. We had three different components. The first one covered unmet needs in pediatric psychopharmacology. The second one focused on translational pediatric pharmacology, animal models, and beyond. And in the third part, we covered pediatric clinical trials, the methodological issues and problems, and also discussed how to actually overcome those. Looking at the unmet needs in pediatric psychopharmacology, the group identified that the off-label use of adult medications in children and adolescents is a problem, either off-label use because of different age or different indications. Furthermore, the regulatory requirements that are needed for approval have to be reviewed carefully and have now made possible more trials by pharmaceutical industry, because now a pediatric investigational plan is needed, which helps that companies deliver data in children and adolescents in medications that they develop even for adults. However, there is still a big gap. We do not have enough agents or data on agents that are safe and effective in children and adolescents across a wide range of disorders that often emerge early in life. Clinicians have to use these agents without efficacy and safety data. We do not know how long the duration of treatment should be when patients respond. Also, there are little data available for combination treatments, although clinicians use these medications often not only in monotherapy, given the severity and chronicity of the conditions that we treat. Furthermore, the prevention of illness and the prevention of chronicity are issues that need further study. Since medications can have side effects, the prevention and reversal of side effects is equally important. What is most problematic in all of psychiatry, but also covers obviously or makes it difficult in child psychiatry, is that there is a heterogeneity of the illness. There is an overlap of psychiatric conditions, and we do not have yet biologically based and etiology-based treatments. Since children and adolescents have an illness at sensitive developmental stages, it is also important to investigate whether certain treatments have to be given at different doses or with different agents. Treatment has to contain different agents when patients are earlier or later in their development. We also don't know whether side effects might follow certain developmental stages. And since earlier onset of an illness is often associated with greater chronicity, having treatments for refractory illness in children and adolescents requires further study. Conversely, looking at naturalistic outcomes in children and adolescents that do or do not receive treatment is also important. Particularly long-term treatment effects require study, which is sometimes hard to do because of the large dropouts. Since there are vulnerability and resiliency factors, these need to be studied in interaction with medication treatments. Often medication treatments are developed just for general symptomatology, but we do know that patients and patient subgroups suffer from specific symptoms. Treatments for these specific symptoms are important. That includes not only positive or negative symptoms in schizophrenia or schizophrenia-like disorders, cognitive disturbance, or mood instability or aggression, but also quality of life, functional outcomes, as well as patient-centered outcomes. Furthermore, since we know that some patients do respond and others don't, we need to understand better moderators and mediators. Clearly, biomarkers and pathophysiology-based treatments are most important. That is also true for adult psychiatry. But since children and adolescents have an early onset of illness, this may already give us some subgrouping or some enrichment in certain disorders. Finally, infrastructure and funding needs were also discussed. In the second part, the translational pediatric pharmacology part, there was a strong emphasis on the utility and need for improvement of animal models. Current animal models for psychiatric disorders are not always very helpful. We need to improve the quality of these models in order to improve the selection process for drug treatments and targets. We need to create and identify novel treatment targets, drug classes, and achieve a functional validation of targets coming from genetic networks in psychiatric traits and disorders. Then, findings need to be implemented from clinical surrogate markers that are derived from animal models. Clearly, there is a need to design better behavioral tasks that match more onto the human traits. We need to further improve phase and construct validity of the animal models and aim at multidimensional readouts of the tasks-related outcomes. In order to achieve that, we need to learn from mechanisms of rare diseases that have more identifiable mechanisms and genetic underlying structure. Furthermore, psychopharmacological epidemiology needs to be harvested by looking at big data on medication use and psychiatric effects of medications. In the third part, we talked about methodological issues and problems of pediatric clinical trials. These include problems with efficiency, issues with globalization and outsourcing, and lack of funding, particularly now that pharmaceutical industries often retract from the CNS space, which will also affect pediatric psychopharmacology. Many trials are inconclusive, often due to small effect sizes. There are questionable nosological targets by looking just at symptoms and symptom agglomerations. The question is also about external validity, since patients might not reflect the patients that clinicians see in clinical care when they enter into clinical studies. And clearly there is a need for innovation. How can we achieve this innovation? This was a big focus of the discussion. We need to focus on pathogenesis-derived targets. We need to do studies where target engagement is a major focus. We need to look at dose-response relationships in order to verify the biological gradient of the intervention. And there need to be proof-of-concept trials for efficacy signals. Finally, there also is a need for large practical trials in order to translate the knowledge from smaller efficacy randomized control trials into more effectiveness practice-based settings. And clearly, there should also be data mining of existing randomized control trials to identify patients and design issues that may or may not improve noise-to-signal ratio. Through these discussions, we have strengthened the group cohesion, and we will engage in further discussions. There will be a report for the ECNP bulletin, and there will also be a publication coming out of this. And the group is extremely grateful to the ECNP for making this possible as part of the targeted network meetings at the ECNP 2013. Finally, the Pediatric Psychopharmacology Group also acknowledges that this is a very important topic that has received a lot of attention, both academically but also in the media. Obviously, there are questions, are psychopharmacotropic treatments always necessary in children and adolescents? Are sometimes medications overprescribed? Are some patients not picked up early enough that they have an illness? Clearly more research is needed in these areas too. Voting at the end, the group members identified 3 hot areas that require more research in pediatric psychopharmacology. This includes treatments for autism, treatments for mental retardation and reduced intelligence as well as learning disorders, and treatment of aggressive spectrum disorders and symptoms across different psychiatric disorders. One of the illnesses for which antipsychotics are prescribed a lot, although experts believe that this is not always the best option. Therefore, we would look for funding to study these conditions more, and hopefully we will generate data from this network in order to inform the field. The final point was that conditions and treatments for preschoolers would also receive a lot of more attention, because many of these young patients are treated, but there are almost no data on efficacy or safety available.